Good afternoon, students, and welcome back to this week, the course on our logistics and supply chain management. Unfortunately, we lost a day last week, I remember, and we could not catch up. So, the subject on purchase management, which was supposed to be scheduled, which was supposed to be conducted last week, we are going to conduct that particular course today. We are going to compress it a little bit because we also have to accommodate our other subject or other chapter on network designing. So, basically we are going to discuss two chapters today. First we will start with purchase management, as you must have seen on the monitor itself. In the second half, after we come back from the break, we will discuss the other important subject of network designing. As always, do remember that all these chapters, all the subjects are quite large, quite vast, quite extended, but as far this particular course is concerned, our current course on supply chain management or logistics and supply chain management is concerned, we are discussing only the relevant points. So, be very careful and look and follow the programs very carefully and see what all areas I am discussing on a particular topic. As always, we are going to do a bit of a recap. If you remember, last week on Monday, we discussed a very important and relevant topic in supply chain management, and that was inventory management. We discussed the different types of inventory, why inventories are required, how does it strengthen the entire supply chain process, how the different suppliers, the companies, the plants, the retailers, distributors are connected to each other. We discussed the average inventory of how the companies derive the inventory costs, particularly the two inventory costs, one is the holding and one is the ordering cost, how they utilize the average inventory for that. We discussed the economic order quantity, we discussed what would be the optimal quantity lot size that a particular company should order. We also discussed how companies handle the quantity discounts that are made available by the suppliers. So, these are basically the topics. We also discussed that among all the functional groups, how different functional groups view or prefer whether a high inventory or a lower inventory. We did not discuss economic production quantity because we said that we are going to discuss only those models which are relevant to each other. One particular topic I would like to just touch upon before we go to purchase management, and that is what is called inventories. It is very challenging to do inventory management for products which has very short life cycle. Okay, it's very challenging. So, there is a challenge to do an inventory for products like perishable goods, products like suppose a magazine or a newspaper, for instance, okay, which has particularly the shortest life cycle, because you have to understand newspapers are manufactured and distributed all over the world in large quantities. Huge amount of money is spent. If you think of the globe as a whole, think of newspaper, just an example. Okay, so there is a challenge. It is called a single period inventory model. That is the only period, and for a newspaper the single period is just a day. Just think of the newspaper companies who are dealing in newspaper print media. They have to be very careful, because if they produce anything excess, the excess newspapers or the whatever the media, the newspapers that they manufacture, that will go for a waste. It will be a huge loss for the company. On the flip side, now there is a demand in the market. If they produce anything less, then they are going to lose out the competitors, because a customer for a particular newspaper will not wait for that particular brand or that particular newspaper, or whether it is whatever that particular company may be, maybe it's Times of India or Hindu or Indian Express. There are different types of there are different companies who are circulating newspaper. So, if a particular company is not creating enough inventory or stock for the newspaper as per the demand of the market, they are going to lose out on business, because the customer will not wait. They will go to the other company and the other company will benefit out of it. So, it is called a single period inventory model, which I missed out, and I thought that let me touch upon. So, this has nothing to do with our today's topic, which is purchase management. But before that, I do remember my promise. We missed out on one video on Monday, and I did mention that before we start the next session, that's today, we are going to see that video. See that video very carefully. I am going to play that video right now. It's on what are the different types of inventory. If you just go back and recall the different types of inventory: components, raw materials, finished products, assembly, work in progress. So, there are different types of inventory which are required by various companies. Companies who are producing raw materials, then the company who is producing the components, then the components are being sent to the plant, to the companies who are producing the finished good, then that company is sending or they are forwarding the finished products to the distributor, distributor to the retailer, etc. So, there are different segments of business organizations who are keeping inventory, and this current video is going to tell us what are the different types of inventory that are kept and managed by various organizations. Just see the video. So, as you would have seen, we are not going to get extended on inventory management any further, but inventory management is perhaps one of the most significant, one of the most critical area that every supply chain manager or any logistics manager should consider upon, because one has to understand that you can neither have an excess inventory nor you can have any deficit in the inventory. Both is going to, if you have a deficit, then your supply to the customer may be affected, and over inventory, because if you remember, inventory management, having inventory invites cost, okay, and logistics professionals have which I have told you many a times during this particular course, logistics and supply chain manager has a very, very important role to play in order to maintain a balance between the cost and also to ensure that should not compromise the customer service. So, that is all on inventory management so far. We are going to go to our next topic and we will discuss go to the PowerPoint on purchase management. Before we go to the PowerPoint, let me tell you the 3 areas on purchase management that we are going to discuss is purchase management itself. We will touch upon a very, very important and a very relevant topic and which is very important today, negotiation. And sourcing. So, these are the 3 areas that we are going to discuss today, and we have to discuss fast. We will only as far the first stuff is concerned, we will only see the slides, and I will when we go through the slides, I will explain you about all these 3 areas on purchase management. So, let us go to the slide and discuss purchase management. So, purchasing refers acquiring goods or services. There are certain goals of the enterprise, and purchasing ensures that those goals, the objectives are fulfilled. All production firms have the need of supplies of materials, services. So, it should include the purchase of raw materials, spare parts, etc., etc. The chief function of the purchase manager is to satisfy the materials, the supplies related to requirement of other departments. So, there is a mission. It has to be done according to the mission of the company, the purpose of the purpose for which the materials are procured, the goals of the company, and the objectives of the company. So, this is basically tells you what purchasing is all about in a nutshell. Let us see what are the specific objectives of purchasing. We have to, the purchase managers or the purchase department has an objective to purchase the right quality of materials, what is required, that should satisfy why this particular item is bought for. Proper negotiation to ensure, because if you remember, we have been discussing purchasing, there are different kinds of purchasing. We are talking of logistics and supply chain management. So, the logistics and the supply chain manager plays a huge role in terms of procurement, purchase, negotiation, selection of vendors, etc., etc., because logistics cost is almost 10 to 15% of the total revenue. And we have already discussed in the very first session of this particular course as to the country itself is spending on an average of 9 to 10% on the GDP on logistics cost. So, it is extremely important that we, while we buy the right material or we buy the right services, we also buy it at the right price. So, we have to ensure, we have to coordinate with the other departments what are their requirements, because the purchase department by themselves, they do not have any requirement themselves. So, they are basically coordinating on behalf of other departments and fulfilling their needs by coordinating with the suppliers and procuring purchasing items from them. They have to ensure timely deliveries, continuous and regular supplies, minimize wastage, ensure good quality, control the quantity of material, information about new material processes. They have to keep themselves informed. Everybody who is involved in purchasing have to keep themselves informed about the new products, new processes, new technologies that are being applied, new vendors which are coming to the market. So, all this information, they have to be very, very informative. So, these are all the objectives of purchasing. Let us go to the next slide. This is very, very important. If you see in the slide, basically it is the 4 P's that defines procurement management or purchase management. Purpose, why is procurement, why is purchase required, why is that particular purchase required, what is the policy of the company. Purchase is required, fair enough, but the company has certain policies based on which vendor to be bought from, what is the process of buying, different policies of the company, what are the right practices, and what should be the process. Should purchase be done from a single vendor? Should negotiations be done from different vendors? Should vendors be given equal opportunities? Should the company buy at the lowest cost? Should the company buy at the best services? Should the company buy from the best vendor in the market, the vendor having the best reputation? So, there are different procedure policies. So, these are the basically the 4 P's which defines the entire purchase process of a particular company. Let us go to the next slide. What are the key issues involved while purchasing? Buy in the right quantity, buy the right quality, buy at the right time when it is required, and where to buy from. Do we buy from our own country? Do we buy from our own town, our own city, from other state, from other country? Should we import the material? It is very, very, very important. So, while the 4 P's are important: purpose, place, policy, practices, procedure. Purpose, policy, practices, procedure. These are the basic, these are the fundamentals of procurement, and you have to ensure based on those fundamentals that you buy the right quantity, quality at the right time and at the right place. So, these are the principles of purchasing. What are the principles of purchasing? As we have already seen the right quality from the previous slide, from the right source, from the right vendor, from the right supplier at the right place, right time, the right price. So, these are the basically the principles of purchasing. These are the principles which should ideally be followed by every company while doing any kind of purchasing. What do companies purchase? Different. A company runs on a success or the profitability of a company depends hugely on the kind of the process of procurement they have, right from the raw materials, right from services, right from capital expenditures. So, different kind of procurement purchases takes place in a company to run a company. There are capital expenditure, there are operating expenditure, and everywhere there is a purchase and procurement happening on and on. It is a continuous process, and unless such principles are practiced, the company will not do a fair job and they will get into a loss making proposition. Let us go to the next slide. So, this is basically the procedure. That is a chart to identify the need. Basically, how does the process happens? Now, the process differs from company to company. So, this basically the current slide that is being shown is basically a standard that you identify what is required, and then you form a team, then you study, evaluate the customer, you negotiate with the customer, you acquire the material, and then you do implementation. That means you purchase, you get the items, and then post evaluation whether the purchase was done as per the policy of the company, whether materials were found in the right condition, whether it satisfies the need of the customer, and if it does, the last point as it says, then the company goes through a renewal process, a long term vendor management process. The best practices. What are the best practices? What should a company ideally follow while doing a procurement? It should follow a process, a proper process. Now, if you see RFI, RFQ and RFP, it starts with a company asking a vendor or a supplier the information about the company, different types of information, its backgrounds, its other customers, its capacity, its network, etc., etc. Followed by he would ask the company to give a quotation, and once a quotation is received, basically quotation indicates the kind of price, unit price, overall price, etc., etc., and followed by an overall proposal based on which a company decides whether to buy from that particular supplier or vendor or not. Then competition, one has to understand that there are competition, there are other suppliers as well. So, they also need to look at the competition. What are the other options available? Fairness. If you are trying to purchase or if you are trying to evaluate different suppliers, you should give equal opportunity to everybody. It should be legal, it should be ethical. The practices should be legal and ethical, and I think all of you graduates, postgraduates who are listening to this particular lecture, I need not get extended. Fair practices should be done. It should be bought at the right price. There should not be any kind of unfair dealing with between the supplier as well as the purchaser. Integrity policy on information, we have to understand today in the world of technology, we are sharing a lot of data. The supplier is sharing a lot of data with the purchaser, whereas the company who's buying or purchasing, he is also sharing a lot of information with the supplier. So, all this information should be kept confidential. Nobody should use this information for his own benefit. Okay? So, there has to be a trust, a sense of they have to understand that these are confidential. So, a lot of integrity should be applied. Long term vendor policy, one should ensure, the company should ensure that he is not purchasing from a vendor for a short term period. There has to be a long term, so that vendor also understand that he has a lot of stake. He also feels confident, he feels satisfied. Looking at a long term prospect, looking at a long term management, and this is something that we will see at a later stage in strategic management. Today logistics management, supply chain management is gradually, logistics management is shifting from tactical phase to the strategical phase. Vendors are being looked at partners today. So, people want to have vendors or they want to onboard vendors for a long term, and of course, you have to do the best business practices, whatever that is available, whatever is the best possible business practices, which is definitely related to point number 3 and point number 4, which is fairness and legal and ethical. So, these are the basically the best practices for procurement. So, what are the different methods of purchasing? According to the requirement for particular period of time. Market purchases, purchase of goods usually in smaller quantities on an emergency without contract or negotiation, instant buy without negotiation, whatever that is available in the market based on the market price, purchase. Speculative, suppose I am anticipating a sudden hike in a particular product. So, what I would do, it is almost speculation that we do in the stock market also. So, we buy shares when the share prices are down. Why do we do that? We want to sell those shares, those stocks or those securities at a time when the prices are high. Similarly, in purchasing also, certain purchases are made at a time when the prices are low for a particular product, not for internal use, but with a speculation that the price may go up in future, so that the company can sell the same product at a higher price and earn profit. Contract purchasing, it is a long term purchasing based on certain contracts, based on certain terms and contracts. Schedule purchasing, suppliers are supplied a probable time schedule for material requirement, so that they are in a position. So, scheduled, that means the supplier is given a particular period of time and they are informed or indicated well in advance that they have to supply in that particular scheduled period. So, the supplier also knows he has a timeline in front of him, he has enough time to plan his production and supply accordingly. So, these are the different methods or different types of purchasing, you may say. So, what are the different procurement cycle? This we have seen in one of the slides earlier. You gather information about the vendor, information about the kind of product the vendor is able to manufacture. You contact the supplier, you do a background review, you do an assessment of the vendor, and once that has been done, you negotiate. You negotiate on price, you negotiate on terms and conditions. Negotiation, one has to understand, we have a small section on negotiation, and negotiation sometimes is understood as negotiation only on price. No, there are different types of negotiation that happens. Negotiation on lead time, for instance, companies are very much interested. Companies are in fact ready to pay a higher price for a better quality, for a better lead time. So, negotiation is not always on price itself. So, there are different factors, different parameters for which negotiation happens between the buyer and the seller. Let us go back to the slide once again. Then the fulfillment, then the process of fulfillment, that means based on the contract signed, the purchase goods or services are shipped. So, the actual operation happens at this point of time. The fulfillment of the contract happens, the fulfillment of the purchasing happens. the material actually, the physical goods actually move from the supplier to the buyer, and the renewal. That means, once the buyer or once the supplier has established his credentials with the buyer and the buyer is satisfied, then they go for a renewal, they go for further purchase, they go for a yearly, they go for a 5-yearly or a period or a contract for a particular period of time. So, basically this is the process, and this is the process which ideally should be followed. These slides are connected to each other. This particular slide on methods or process is connected to the previous slide. If you remember, if you go to the previous slide which says best business practices and organized processes, the first one RFI, RFQ, RFP, etc., etc., etc. Let us go to the next slide. So, the first process starts with requisition. This is not ideally, this is a very standard format of a purchase requisition. These requisitions are received by authorities or by people who are managing the procurement or purchase department. These requisitions or requirements are received from various departments, depending upon what company, what they are dealing in. It can be as small as stationaries, or it can be as big as raw materials, it can be as big as transportation services or shipping services, whatever it may be product or services. So, once the requisitions are received, then locate and select the customer suppliers, see how reliable they are. They have to assure a timely delivery, they have to assure after sales service, attitude with regards to any kind of damages, shortages, etc., etc., whether they are ready to compensate on that, they are going to correct it, they are going to modify, etc., or they are going to also provide some technical assistance in terms of installation, in terms of IT related services. So, these are the different background check, these are the different parameters or the qualities that a procurement manager would try to find within in a particular supplier. Number 3, place the orders once you are satisfied. So, we have all heard, and it is a very common term of purchase order, and this again I repeat, all these formats that I am showing is not sacrosanct. There are purchase orders which are available, different companies use different purchase orders, but basically there are few informations which are available in a purchase order. It is basically the name of the company, the quantity that is required, the time at which the quantity is required, the unit price of those particular product, and other different terms and conditions. What is the total volume of required? What is the total invoice value? So, these are the basically important informations which are available in a purchase order. Number 4, follow up. It is important that once you have given the purchase order, the company always expects the supplier to deliver the material at a particular time. So, a particular follow up, constant follow up between the buyer and the seller has to happen, because one has to understand that whatever you procure, there is a purpose. If you are procuring components or raw materials, your finished products will suffer big time if the supply does not reach you on time. Number 2, there are different categories of items. In inventory management, there is something called ABC analysis, which is totally different, but you have to understand there are some very, very important and critical raw materials or components which are required. So, importance should be given to those items, for example, and the supply should be made known that those items should reach as per the lead time. There cannot be any flexibility or compromise on that. Number 5, invoices have to be received from the supplier, maintain records, dispose of outdated and scrapped items, control your own store, warehouse and inventory, and handle damages and demurrage claim. Very important, because sometimes procurement happens in large volumes. The money involved or the revenue involved are in millions and billions of dollars. So, one has to understand, and as I said, purchase may not happen only within the locality, within the particular city or the state or the country. Sometimes procurement or people procure items from overseas, they import items. So, there is transit involved, there is transportation involved, there is multimodal transportation involved. So, one has to consider that there is a possibility of a damage. So, claims insurance is a very important part of the procurement practice. So, kind of procurement documents, basically there are many. I have tried to point out only a few. RFP, the request for proposal, request for information, request for quotation, solicitation, these are invitation for bids, request for quotation and proposal, which goes from the buyer to the seller. The first three, request for proposal, the proposal has to come from the seller, information and quotation has to come from the seller. Offers, contracts, amendments, modification, MOUs. So, when you do a purchase, depending upon which company it is, what is the kind of product they are dealing in, what kind of purchase they are doing. So, the type of procurement documents varies from company to company and from case to case, from industry to industry. And this forms a very, very important part. So, tendering happens, request for proposal. So, this comes in order, and these documents are extremely important today. Companies are shifting and have already shifted from manual documentation to digital documentation. Everything is online, the transactions are online, the negotiations are online, all exchanges of information are online. So, the companies have an advantage of not keeping too many hard copies of the documents. So, in the next few slides you actually see some specimen of request for quotation or a request for information. Again we go back to the procurement documents, low risk contract, major risk contracts. So, services, professionals, facilities, supplies, international complex purchases. So, the various kinds of procurement documents, and as I said, if you can see from the slide itself, what is the type of purchase happening? Am I purchasing something which does not have too much of a risk involved? That means it can be replaced very easily. Even if it is get lost or damaged or stolen, nothing critical would happen. But there are contracts which are high risk. The type of work required is more difficult in nature, and any small error can lead to some major trouble with both the buyer as well as the suppliers. What kind of services is the professional services, is the facilities? More often than not in this service, the work outsourced is maintain operations of an existing structure of a system. So, as you can see, documentation of procurement cannot be studied in 2 or 3 slides. One has to explore. This basically gives you the standard ones. Again, if you see the next slide gives you an image or a sample of purchase order, and if you remember, as I said, what is important, the purchase order is issued by the buyer in favor of the supplier or the seller, and basically you do not have to look at the entire purchase order, what is required for you, and probably you will be asked in case there is an evaluation, what are the different information or inputs which are seen in a particular purchase order. Name of the supplier, of course, the unit, the type of the description of the item, the price of the item per unit, the total value of the purchase. Okay. There is a purchase number, there is a number, there is a date, there is a date of supply, there is a date of issue of purchase order, etc., etc. These are the some of the important information or inputs which are seen in a purchase order. Commercial invoice. The commercial invoice, when a supplier buys, supplier will raise an invoice to the buyer for payment. So, again I repeat, commercial invoice is something again very, very important, but it all depends upon a particular supply. It is not sacrosanct, the formats are not standard. So, it differs, but basically few of the informations are quite common. So, sometimes we do purchase for a requirement, sometimes we do purchase, let us see the slides again, we do purchase for a definite period of time, we do for purchase for, we do a market purchasing. These are basically an extended explanation of the different kinds of purchasing that we have discussed earlier, contract purchasing, schedule purchasing. We now come to the subtopic of negotiation, which is a very, very, very integral part of the entire purchasing process. Negotiation between the supplier and the buyer. And I very briefly told you, now negotiation can be a huge chapter by itself. There is a lot to learn about negotiation, the skills of negotiation, the process of negotiation, the rules of negotiation. There are many things to learn. What we are going to do today is only going to refer to the best practices and the basically what are the principles of negotiation. As I said, more often than none, it is thought negotiation is done only on price, and it is wrong. So let us go and see the slides on negotiation. What are the steps? Request necessary concessions, high aspirations, general positive psychological energy and prevent negotiator. So let us go to planning. Is extremely important. Planning is one of the first part that when you negotiate. Now, who is negotiating? The buyer is negotiating with the supplier, and the supplier is negotiating with the buyer. So, from both sides, one needs to plan before they sit across the table to negotiate. So, a high aspiration communicates confidence to the other party and generally prevents irrational negotiations. Nothing irrational, it should be supported by certain sound logic. High aspiration require other negotiating party to expend more energy and try to lower the aspirations. So, everybody, both the parties will try, say those should be planned enough to expect or anticipate what the other party would desire or would like to say or negotiate from him. So, a proper planning from both the buyer and the supplier is required. So, let us see the slide again. When it comes to planning, what is the reason for negotiating? What are the topics to be covered? What is my perception of the issue? That of the opposer? What resource can I draw on? So, this is basically some bullet points on how planning is done before a negotiation happens. What do I know about my opposer? When I say opposer, for a supplier, the buyer is an opposer, and for the buyer, the supplier is an opposer. What do I know about the person who represent? What are the negotiating style of the other party? What are my interests? So, all these are considered before you one sit across for negotiation. These are the plannings, these are the things that needs to be planned before you negotiate. Again, few other points on negotiation. I should know what the other parties are interested about. Are there any common interest? Are there any conflicting interest? What standard to use resolve the conflict? In case there is a conflict interest, how do I resolve in anticipation? What is the other side talking to me? Why do they need something from me, etc. So, setting goals and objectives. So, again, as I say, when I say negotiation, when I said negotiation is not only price, one has to understand in negotiation today, it is not only the buyer which has the upper hand, which tries to do the upper hand because he is buying and the seller is saying no. So, negotiation has to have certain goals and objectives. The goals and objectives should be specific, it should not deviate, to the point, it should be measurable. What are my goals? What I am going to achieve? Am I trying to achieve 10% discount? Am I trying to achieve 10% reduction in the cost from previous year or from the other vendor? Is it achievable? If I am asking for 10% discount, is it achievable? Will my opposer or will the supplier or the supplier is going to accept that particular discount? Is it challenging? Is it compatible? Is it compatible means is it it will lead to a win-win situation or not? That means whether it is going to satisfy, whether it is going to create a balance between the buyer and the seller. Please understand, and we will see in one of the slides, the basic objective of a negotiation should be a win-win situation where both the parties should be satisfied. Okay. Otherwise, it will result in a loss. If it results in a dissatisfaction, loss to the others, the overall procurement or the purchase will not be successful. Let us go to slides. So, interpersonal skills are very important. So, our behavior, the way we behave, the way we talk, the way we communicate with others. No one style is superior to the other. To improve your negotiation, know how to deal with others. So, these are basically contract negotiator must do. A successful master the arts of soft skills, possess the intellectual ability, adapt to strategies under their own personalities. This is in a way we have touched earlier as well. So, these are the negotiation objectives of the buyer. These are the negotiation objective of the seller. Let us see what the buyer wants. Acquires necessary supplier services on time, quality, establish administrative price arrangements, satisfy need of the end users. Why is he buying for? He is buying for the end users. So, whatever he buys should ultimately satisfy the end user. And the seller grow profitable revenue. He wants to sell at a higher profit margin, increase his own market share, delivery quality supplies. So, these are the essential elements of a contract negotiation. When I say contract negotiation, if you remember contract procurement, it is for a long term. The buyer and the seller wants to establish a long term relationship. So, what are the key inputs, what are the techniques that are required, and what are the desired outputs. Definitely this particular study material will be uploaded in the system. You will be able to download and read each of them. Basically, I am just touching the bullet points. So, contract negotiation process, plan, conduct, and what are the documents which are required. These are the checklists of the buyers. Before you negotiate, the buyer should make sure that these are available. He should know this is something we also touched earlier in one of the slides. Conduct the market research. He should know the market, he should know the other companies, he should know other suppliers, what is available, what is the kind of price that is available in the market. So, basically when you say contract checklist for buyer and checklist for seller, we are basically talking of a preparation. That means, when I go for a negotiation, the buyer should try to understand and know the seller as much as possible, whereas the seller should go on a negotiation table. So, there has to be certain checklists about the buyer's background, what is the kind of purchase he does, what is his how is credibility in the market, whether he is a good paymaster or not, whether he is a bad paymaster as far as the supplier is concerned. So, he should have these checklists ready with him. Similarly, the buyer should also have a checklist as far as the supplier is concerned. So, he is ready, both the parties are ready to confront each other on the negotiation table. So, negotiation is not something that somebody is born with. Yeah, somebody has a natural talent of negotiating, but even if you do not have a talent, negotiation is a skill, and skill is acquired. One can learn negotiation. One can always learn how to negotiate, and there are different ways of learning negotiation. There are different books which are available on negotiations. Here we are just giving you a summary. We are telling you negotiation in a nutshell. So, doesn't matter, because today in every company, negotiation skill of managers are given a lot of importance, because individuals having strong negotiation skill can increase the profitability of the company. Here we will take a small break. When we come back, we will have the the last part of purchase management, that is sourcing, to be covered. Once we have done that, we will go to our next topic on network decision. Thank you very much.